The moment Evelyn Carter put on the diamond ring, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. The whisper moved through the Manhattan Gala like a crack through glass. Under towering crystal chandeliers worth more than most American homes, politicians paused mid-conversation, waiters froze beside silver trays of champagne, and CEOs who controlled billion-dollar companies slowly turned toward the man standing beside her. Evelyn felt her pulse stumble in her chest. Just 30 minutes earlier, she had been in a cramped restroom near the hotel kitchen, trying to hide the loose thread on her black dress with clear nail polish. Now she stood in the center of one of the richest rooms in New York City pretending to be engaged to a man she barely knew. The ballroom smelled like white roses, old money, and expensive perfume. Everything shimmered. Gold-trimmed ceilings rose nearly 40 feet overhead. Women wrapped in couture gowns laughed softly behind diamond-covered fingers. Men with silver hair and watches worth $500,000 spoke in low voices about mergers and private islands. Evelyn felt like a mistake someone forgot to remove from the guest list. She tightened her grip around the champagne glass before realizing her hand was trembling. Across the ballroom, a violin quartet played beneath soft amber lights while photographers circled the wealthy elite like sharks sensing blood in dark water. And beside her stood Alexander Hayes. Calm. Silent. Untouchable. His tailored black tuxedo fit him with terrifying perfection, but it was not the suit that unsettled Evelyn. It was his stillness. In a room full of people desperate to be seen, Alexander carried himself like a man who already owned everything. "Relax," he said quietly without looking at her. His deep voice barely rose above the music. "You're gripping the glass like you want to throw it at someone." Evelyn forced a nervous smile. "Maybe I do." For the first time that evening, the corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. 3 days ago, Evelyn had never heard his name. 3 days ago, she was sitting beside her mother's hospital bed in Queens while overdue medical bills piled across a plastic chair. Her mother needed another heart procedure. Insurance would only cover part of it. Evelyn had already sold her old car, emptied her savings account, and picked up double shifts arranging flowers for luxury events she could never afford to attend. Then Alexander Hayes walked into her life with a single impossible offer. "Pretend to be my fiancé for 90 days. In return, he would pay every medical bill her mother had. No loans. No debt. No catch," he was willing to explain. At first, Evelyn thought the offer was some kind of cruel joke wealthy men played when they got bored. But Alexander never laughed. He simply slid the contract across the table inside a quiet office overlooking Central Park and waited for her answer. Now she stood under a sea of chandeliers wearing a ring so heavy it didn't feel real. Then something changed in the room. One by one, powerful people began approaching Alexander. Not casually. Carefully. Respectfully. An older senator shook his hand with both of his own. A famous tech billionaire lowered his voice when speaking to him. Even the hotel owner himself walked over personally with nervous eyes and said, "Mr. Hayes, your private floor has been secured." Evelyn blinked. Private floor? Her stomach tightened. Earlier, Alexander told her he was simply an investor from Chicago trying to avoid media attention during a family negotiation. But investors did not make billionaires nervous. And they certainly did not make United States senators straighten their ties before speaking. Then Evelyn overheard a woman whisper behind her diamond-covered mask of a smile. "Does she even know who he really is?" Another answered softly, "No." "Look at her face. She has no idea." Evelyn slowly turned toward Alexander. But before she could speak, the entire ballroom suddenly fell silent as an elderly man near the stage raised his glass and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander Hayes has arrived." The applause that followed was not warm. It was careful. Controlled. The kind of applause people gave men who could change their lives with a single phone call. Evelyn felt the sound vibrate through the marble ballroom floor beneath her heels as hundreds of wealthy guests turned toward Alexander Hayes with polished smiles and guarded eyes. He did not react like someone enjoying attention. He reacted like someone enduring it. Alexander gave one small nod toward the crowd before gently placing his hand against the small of Evelyn's back. The gesture was light, almost formal, but it instantly grounded her. "Smile," he murmured quietly. "Half the room is trying to figure out who you are." Evelyn forced her lips upward even as panic swirled inside her chest. A few feet away, a famous television anchor whispered something into her husband's ear while staring directly at Evelyn's ring. Nearby, an older woman wrapped in emerald silk narrowed her eyes with open disapproval. Evelyn suddenly became aware of every tiny flaw she carried into the room. Her thrift store coat was hidden upstairs in the hotel closet. Her manicure was chipped beneath pale pink polish. Earlier that afternoon she had eaten vending machine crackers beside her mother's hospital room because she could not afford cafeteria food. And now she stood surrounded by people whose watches cost more than her entire apartment building. The ballroom lights reflected against towering walls of glass overlooking Manhattan. Outside, the city glittered beneath the dark sky like spilled diamonds. Inside, servers carried silver trays filled with lobster bites, imported caviar, and crystal flutes of champagne that smelled faintly of apples and flowers. Evelyn barely noticed any of it because her attention stayed fixed on the strange shift in people whenever Alexander moved. Conversations paused when he walked past. Men who looked twice his age straightened their posture before greeting him. Women who had spent decades inside elite social circles suddenly sounded nervous around him. It made no sense. Alexander leaned slightly closer toward her. "You are thinking too loudly." Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your face." His voice remained calm. "It gives everything away." For the first time that evening, she looked directly into his eyes. They were not cold the way she first assumed. They were tired. Deeply tired. Like someone who had spent years carrying responsibilities too heavy to put down. Before she could answer, another man approached them. Tall. Gray-haired. Expensive navy tuxedo. The silver-haired stranger smiled politely at Evelyn before extending his hand toward Alexander. "Your father would have been proud tonight." The air changed instantly. Alexander's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Thank you, Walter." The older man lowered his voice. "The board members are already upstairs waiting." Evelyn caught only fragments, but one phrase made her stomach twist. Majority ownership transfer. Alexander noticed her expression immediately. "Business," he said flatly. "Nothing you need to worry about." But that only made her worry more. Across the ballroom, photographers suddenly crowded near the grand staircase as several luxury investors arrived together. Flashing camera lights reflected off marble columns and crystal chandeliers like tiny explosions of white fire. Evelyn instinctively stepped backward, uncomfortable under the growing attention. Her heel caught the edge of her dress. Before she stumbled, Alexander reached for her hand with quick, steady reflexes. The room seemed to freeze again. Not because she nearly fell. Because he held on to her afterward. His thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles as if the gesture was unconscious. Real. And for one dangerous second, Evelyn forgot the contract entirely. Then she heard a woman nearby whisper sharply, "That ring belonged to his mother." Evelyn's breath caught. Slowly, she looked down at the massive diamond resting on her finger beneath the ballroom lights. Earlier, she assumed it was borrowed jewelry from some luxury stylist. But now the pieces stopped fitting together. The private floor. The board members upstairs. The terrified respect in everyone's eyes. And now this ring. Alexander followed her gaze and finally said the one thing that made her heart begin to pound even harder. "There is something I should have told you before tonight." Evelyn stared at him while the noise of the ballroom faded into a dull, distant hum. Around them, crystal glasses clinked softly beneath the golden lights, and a jazz pianist somewhere near the stage played slow, elegant notes that floated through the air like smoke. But all Evelyn could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. Alexander's expression remained unreadable. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous in the quietest way possible. "You lied to me," she whispered. It was not anger in her voice yet. It was confusion. Alexander glanced toward the crowded ballroom before answering. I omitted details. Evelyn almost laughed at the absurdity of the sentence. Omitted details? As if secretly being one of the richest men in the country was some tiny, forgotten fact. A waiter passed carrying champagne in crystal flutes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Nearby, cameras flashed again as another billionaire entered the gala. But people barely looked away from Alexander. That was what unsettled her most. He was not simply important here. He was the center of gravity. You told me you were an investor, Evelyn said carefully. You never said. She stopped because she did not even know how to finish the sentence. Alexander lowered his voice. Because if I had, you would have said no. The honesty of the answer caught her off guard. Before she could respond, a woman approached them wearing a silver gown that shimmered like liquid metal beneath the chandeliers. She looked to be in her early 40s, elegant and impossibly polished, with icy blonde hair swept into a perfect twist. Her smile toward Evelyn was beautiful and completely empty. Alexander, she said smoothly. The board is becoming impatient. Alexander's face hardened slightly. Then they can wait another 5 minutes. The woman's eyes shifted toward Evelyn's ring. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before disappearing beneath practiced sophistication. Interesting choice, she said softly. Your mother protected that ring for decades. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten again. The woman extended a hand toward her. Vivienne Laurent. Evelyn shook it carefully. Vivienne's fingers were cool and weightless, like touching marble. You must be very special, Vivienne continued. Alexander does not bring strangers into family matters. Family? The word lingered in the air longer than it should have. Alexander stepped slightly closer to Evelyn, almost shielding her from the conversation. Vivienne, he said quietly. Not tonight. For the first time, Vivienne's smile cracked at the edges. You think this is still your decision? She asked. Then she walked away without another word, disappearing into the sea of diamonds and tuxedos. Evelyn watched her leave. She hates me already. She hates surprises, Alexander replied. And I surprised everyone tonight. The orchestra music swelled softly as couples drifted toward the ballroom dance floor. Beyond the giant windows overlooking Manhattan, rain had started falling across the city skyline, blurring the lights into rivers of gold and silver. Evelyn suddenly felt exhausted. Everything around her seemed too bright, too expensive, too unreal. 3 days ago, she had been clipping white hydrangeas inside a flower warehouse in Brooklyn while calculating how many groceries she could afford after paying another hospital bill. Now she was standing beside a man who made the wealthiest people in New York nervous. It felt impossible. I need air, she admitted quietly. Alexander studied her for one silent second before nodding. Without a word, he guided her through the crowded ballroom toward a private hallway lined with dark walnut walls and antique paintings. The noise of the gala faded behind them with every step. The hallway smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive cologne. Soft, golden sconces cast warm shadows across the polished floor. For the first time all night, they were alone. Evelyn turned toward him immediately. Who are you really? Alexander exhaled slowly, like a man standing at the edge of something unavoidable. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and handed her a folded newspaper clipping. Evelyn unfolded it carefully beneath the hallway light. Her breath caught instantly. Across the front page was a photograph of Alexander standing beside the President of the United States beneath the headline, "The hidden heir of Hayes Global finally returns." Evelyn stared down at the newspaper clipping while rain streaked softly across the towering hallway windows behind them. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers. In the photograph, Alexander stood beside the president beneath a line of cameras and flashing lights. But even in print he looked exactly the same as he did now. Calm. Reserved. Untouchable. The headline alone felt unreal. The hidden heir of Hayes Global finally returns. Hayes Global. Even Evelyn knew that name. Every American did. Airlines. Hotels. Technology. Banking. Half the skyscrapers lighting the Manhattan skyline carried some connection to the Hayes empire. Her throat tightened. Slowly, she looked up at him. You own Hayes Global? Alexander leaned against the dark walnut wall beside the window, his expression unreadable beneath the warm amber light. Part of it. Evelyn let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. Part of it? 51%. The number hit her harder than the headline itself. 51%. Controlling ownership. Her knees suddenly felt weak beneath the heels she was not used to wearing. Alexander noticed immediately. Without a word, he reached for the crystal water decanter resting on a nearby silver tray and poured her a glass. Even the gesture felt practiced. Elegant. Controlled. Evelyn accepted it carefully. Why would someone like you need a fake engagement? She asked quietly. For the first time that evening, Alexander looked away from her. His eyes drifted toward the rain-soaked city outside the glass. Far below them, headlights crawled through Manhattan streets like streams of light. Because people like me do not belong to ourselves, he said softly. The sentence lingered in the quiet hallway. Somewhere behind the ballroom doors, music and laughter continued, distant and glittering. But here, hidden from the gala lights, Alexander suddenly seemed less like a billionaire and more like a man carrying something heavy for far too long. Evelyn folded the newspaper slowly. Vivian said tonight was a family matter? Alexander nodded once. The board wants me to marry into another financial family. It would secure a merger worth nearly $12 billion. Evelyn stared at him. And you hired me to stop that? Temporarily. The word landed colder than she expected. Temporarily. Of course. This was still a contract. Still business. Still fake. Yet somehow the realization stung more now than it had before. Alexander stepped closer, lowering his voice. The engagement announcement tonight changes the power structure before tomorrow morning's vote. They cannot force negotiations if the public believes I already chose someone. Evelyn swallowed hard. Someone they hate. A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face. That part was not accidental. Despite herself, a tiny smile pulled at her lips. It disappeared quickly. You should have told me the truth. Would you have signed the contract if I had? Evelyn opened her mouth to answer and stopped. No. She would have run immediately. Not because of the money, but because people this wealthy lived in worlds where ordinary people became collateral damage without warning. Alexander studied her carefully, almost as if he already knew her answer. Exactly, he said quietly. The hallway fell silent again. Evelyn looked down at the diamond ring on her finger beneath the warm lights. Earlier it felt beautiful. Now it felt dangerous. Suddenly, the ballroom doors opened behind them. A young assistant in a charcoal suit hurried forward, slightly out of breath. Mr. Hayes, he said carefully, the board meeting cannot be delayed anymore. Alexander's expression hardened instantly, the softness disappearing behind cold composure once again. I will be there in 5 minutes. The assistant nodded and quickly disappeared. Evelyn watched the transformation happen in real time. 1 second he was a tired man speaking quietly in a hidden hallway. The next he became something sharper. More powerful. More distant. Alexander turned back toward her. You do not need to come upstairs. Evelyn frowned slightly. Why? He hesitated. Just briefly. Because once you walk into that room with me, every powerful family in this city will know your name. Before Evelyn could respond, voices suddenly echoed from farther down the hallway. Laughter. Expensive heels against marble. Then Vivian Laurent appeared again beside 2 elegantly dressed older women wearing expressions of polished cruelty. Vivian's eyes landed directly on Evelyn's ring. Her smile this time held no warmth at all. Well, she said softly, it seems the florist has already started rewriting New York society. The air in the hallway seemed to cool 10 degrees the moment Vivian Laurent spoke. Evelyn felt it immediately. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the smiles that followed them. The two older women standing beside Vivian wore the kind of polished expressions built over decades inside private clubs and charity galas where wealth mattered more than kindness. One woman adjusted the diamond bracelet resting on her wrist before looking Evelyn slowly up and down. "She is younger than I expected," she murmured softly. "Alexander always did enjoy surprising people." The second woman gave a quiet laugh behind her champagne glass. "Surprising is one word for it." Evelyn suddenly understood something important about rooms like this. The cruelty here did not shout. It whispered. Alexander stepped forward before Evelyn could respond. His posture remained calm, but the shift in his voice was immediate. Colder. Sharper. "That will be enough." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "Protective already?" "Respectful," Alexander corrected. The hallway fell silent again. Even the distant music from the ballroom seemed farther away now. Vivian studied him carefully for a long moment before speaking again. "The board is waiting upstairs," she said. "And several investors are already questioning tonight's announcement." Alexander did not blink. "Then perhaps they should learn how little I care about their comfort." One of the older women nearly choked on her champagne. Evelyn looked at him in disbelief. No wonder powerful people feared him. He spoke to billionaires the way ordinary people spoke to annoying telemarketers. Vivian's expression hardened slightly beneath her perfect composure. "You inherited your mother's stubbornness. And my father's company," Alexander replied calmly. The sentence landed like a quiet explosion. Both older women immediately looked away. Evelyn felt the tension shift again, deeper this time. She did not fully understand the politics surrounding the Hayes empire yet, but she could already sense the fault lines beneath the polished luxury. Old money. Family expectations. Power struggles hidden behind crystal glasses and silk gowns. Vivian finally exhaled softly. "Fine," she said. "But if this turns into a scandal, do not expect the board to clean up the mess." Then she glanced toward Evelyn one final time. "Enjoy the fantasy while it lasts." The three women disappeared down the hallway, their heels clicking softly against marble floors until the sound vanished entirely. Evelyn released a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "They really hate me." Alexander looked toward the ballroom doors before answering. "No. They hate uncertainty. That is somehow worse." A faint trace of amusement flickered across his face again before disappearing. For a moment neither of them spoke. Rain continued sliding down the giant windows overlooking Manhattan, turning the city lights blurry and dreamlike. Somewhere below, yellow taxis crawled through wet streets while steam rose from subway grates into the cold night air. Evelyn suddenly missed Queens with an ache she could not explain. Her tiny apartment. The smell of coffee from the corner deli downstairs. Her mother humming softly while folding laundry before the hospital bills consumed everything. This world felt beautiful, but none of it felt human. Alexander seemed to notice the exhaustion in her eyes. "You should eat something," he said quietly. Evelyn almost laughed. "I do not think I can swallow anything right now." Without another word, Alexander walked toward a nearby serving table left outside the ballroom doors. He returned a moment later holding a small plate with slices of warm artisan bread and butter. The gesture was so simple it caught Evelyn completely off guard. Not champagne. Not caviar. Bread. "You looked dizzy earlier," he said calmly. "You skipped dinner." Evelyn stared at him. "How do you know that?" Alexander looked genuinely confused by the question. "You said your mother's medication increased this month. That usually means you stop spending money on yourself first." Evelyn felt something shift painfully inside her chest. No one had noticed things like that about her in a very long time. She accepted the plate quietly. The bread was still warm. Real butter melted slowly across the surface, rich and salty. Somehow that tiny ordinary detail felt more comforting than the entire glittering ballroom behind them. Alexander loosened his cuff slightly, finally looking tired again instead of untouchable. "After tonight," he said quietly, "your life is going to change." Evelyn swallowed slowly. "That sounds like a warning," His eyes met hers beneath the warm hallway light. It is. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the hotel, a loud burst of voices suddenly echoed through the corridor, followed by hurried footsteps. Seconds later, Alexander's assistant appeared again, this time pale with panic. "Mr. Hayes?" he said breathlessly. "Someone leaked the engagement announcement to the press early." The moment the assistant spoke, Alexander's entire expression changed. The softness disappeared from his face like a light shutting off behind glass. "Which outlet?" he asked calmly. Too calmly. The assistant swallowed hard. "All of them." Somewhere inside the ballroom, phones began chiming almost simultaneously. One after another. Sharp digital alerts cutting through violin music and polished conversation. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Alexander pulled his own phone from his jacket pocket, glanced at the screen once, then locked it again without reacting. Evelyn did not need to see the headlines to know what they said. The hallway behind them suddenly filled with movement. Wealthy guests drifted toward the ballroom entrance, pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Curiosity moved through rich people like perfume. Silent. Expensive. Impossible to ignore. Alexander's assistant lowered his voice. "There are already photographers gathering outside the hotel." "Of course there are," Alexander muttered. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly against herself, suddenly feeling exposed beneath the elegant black gown. A few hours ago she was invisible. Now her face was probably spreading across every business website and celebrity news feed in America. "This is bad, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Alexander looked at her directly. "Yes." No sugarcoating. No fake reassurance. Just truth. Somehow that honesty felt strangely comforting. From the ballroom entrance, they could already hear the energy shifting. Guests whispered faster now. Some openly glanced at Evelyn with fascination, while others looked almost offended by her existence. The woman in emerald silk from earlier walked past slowly while pretending to check her phone. Evelyn caught a glimpse of the article headline reflected in the screen before the woman turned away. "Mystery Woman Captures Hidden Heir of Hayes Global." Evelyn nearly laughed from disbelief. Mystery woman. As if she were some social climber who appeared out of nowhere to seduce a billionaire. They did not see the overdue hospital bills stuffed inside her kitchen drawer. They did not see her mother falling asleep exhausted in a hospital chair after another round of tests. They only saw the dress. The diamond ring. The fantasy. Alexander noticed the panic rising behind her eyes. "Look at me!" His voice cut through the noise instantly. Evelyn turned toward him. "Breathe," he said quietly. She did not realize how fast her breathing had become until then. Alexander stepped slightly closer, shielding her from the growing attention in the hallway. The scent of cedarwood and expensive cologne surrounded him softly. Clean. Calm. Safe in a way that made no sense. "I can stop this," he said. Evelyn blinked. "How?" One statement. His face remained unreadable. "I told the press the engagement was misunderstood." The words hit harder than she expected. Misunderstood. Not real. Temporary. Contract. Of course. This arrangement had rules. Boundaries. An expiration date. Yet hearing him say it aloud made something ache sharply inside her chest. Evelyn forced herself to nod. "Right. That would fix things." But Alexander did not answer immediately. His eyes lingered on her face for one strange silent second before he finally looked away. "It would protect you." Protect her. The irony almost hurt. Because somehow, standing beside him in the middle of chaos felt safer than standing alone ever had. Before either of them could say another word, a loud burst of camera flashes suddenly exploded through the ballroom entrance. Several reporters had forced their way past hotel security near the front lobby downstairs. Voices echoed through the corridor. "Mr. Hayes, is the engagement real? Who is the woman? Are wedding plans already underway?" The assistant looked horrified. "Security is trying to contain them." Alexander's jaw tightened. Then his phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. What? Silence. His expression darkened instantly. Who leaked it? Another silence. Then slowly, Alexander looked toward the ballroom where Vivian Laurent now stood near the grand staircase watching everything unfold with unreadable eyes. I see, he said coldly before ending the call. Evelyn felt the tension shift around him like a storm building pressure. What happened? She whispered. Alexander slipped the phone back into his pocket without taking his eyes off Vivian. The leak came from inside the board. Then, for the first time all night, Evelyn saw something dangerous flicker behind his calm expression. And now they are trying to destroy you before tomorrow morning. For a moment, Evelyn forgot how to breathe. The hallway around her suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if the polished marble walls themselves were closing in. Destroy you before tomorrow morning. The words echoed inside her chest while reporters shouted questions somewhere beyond the ballroom doors. Flashing camera lights spilled across the hallway ceiling like bursts of lightning. Alexander remained perfectly still beside her, but the stillness no longer looked calm. It looked controlled. Dangerous. His assistant adjusted his tie nervously. The financial networks are already speculating that the engagement announcement is a distraction from the board vote. Alexander's expression did not change. Of course they are. And social media. The assistant hesitated. They found Evelyn's name. Evelyn's stomach dropped instantly. What? The assistant looked genuinely apologetic. Your apartment address was posted online about 6 minutes ago. Everything inside Evelyn went cold. Queen suddenly did not feel far away enough. She pictured the narrow apartment building with chipped paint near the stairwell. The elderly woman downstairs who always fed stray cats outside. The tiny kitchen where her mother kept handwritten grocery lists beside overdue medical bills. That world was private. Fragile. Normal. And now strangers with cameras were tearing through it from behind phone screens. Alexander looked at his assistant sharply. Get security to the hospital immediately. Already done. Evelyn turned toward him in disbelief. You sent security to my mother? Yes. His voice softened slightly. No reporters are getting near her. The knot in Evelyn's chest loosened just enough for her to breathe again. She hated how relieved that made her feel. Hated how quickly this man had become the person she instinctively looked toward when everything started falling apart. Alexander checked his watch once before looking toward the ballroom entrance. I need to go upstairs. Evelyn frowned. To the board meeting? He nodded. If I do not show up now, they will assume the leak worked. Maybe it did work, Evelyn whispered. Alexander looked directly at her. Do you want to leave? The question caught her off guard. Because the truthful answer should have been yes. Absolutely yes. Leave the gala. Leave the headlines. Leave the billionaires and marble hallways and terrifying family politics behind forever. Go back to Queens. Back to flower deliveries and hospital waiting rooms and a life that made sense. But somehow, standing beside him now, leaving felt impossible. Evelyn looked down at the ring still resting on her hand beneath the warm hallway lights. His mother's ring. Not borrowed. Not fake. Real family history sitting on her finger while the entire country speculated about her online. I do not know, she admitted quietly. Alexander studied her face carefully. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal exhaustion beneath the polished control. Neither do I, he said. The honesty in his voice hit harder than any grand speech could have. Somewhere behind them, ballroom music shifted into a slow piano melody, while rain continued tapping softly against the windows overlooking Manhattan. The city below glittered through the storm like another universe entirely. For one strange suspended second, the chaos outside the hallway disappeared. It was just the two of them standing beneath warm golden lights while the world tried to tear them apart faster than either expected. Then Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Evelyn blinked in confusion. What is that? He opened it slowly. Inside rested another ring. Smaller. Simpler. White gold with a single emerald-cut diamond that shimmered softly beneath the hallway lights. "The one you are wearing belongs in a vault," he said quietly. "This one is safer." Evelyn stared at him. "You bought a backup engagement ring?" "3 of them." Despite everything, a surprised laugh escaped her throat. Alexander looked mildly relieved hearing it. "There," he said softly. "You almost sound human again." Before Evelyn could answer, footsteps suddenly echoed sharply down the corridor. Vivienne Laurent appeared once more, but this time she was not smiling at all. Her face had gone pale beneath the ballroom lights. "Alexander," she said urgently, "you need to see this immediately." She held up her phone toward him. Alexander took one look at the screen and the color drained from his face for the first time all night. Evelyn had not known him long, but she already understood how terrifying that was. Slowly, Alexander turned the phone toward her. Across the screen was a newly released photograph of Evelyn entering the hospital earlier that week beside her mother beneath the headline, "Billionaire heir's fiancé linked to mounting medical debt and possible financial motive." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the article glowing from Vivienne's phone screen. The photograph had clearly been taken without her knowledge. She was standing outside St. Matthew's Medical Center in Queens wearing an old gray sweater with her hair tied back carelessly, helping her exhausted mother into a wheelchair beneath harsh fluorescent hospital lights. The image looked painfully ordinary. Human. Vulnerable. And somehow that made the headline even crueler. Possible financial motive. The words twisted inside her chest like ice. Around them, the hallway noise seemed to disappear again beneath the roar building inside Evelyn's ears. She suddenly imagined millions of strangers looking at that photograph and deciding exactly who she was in less than 3 seconds. A gold digger. A liar. Another woman chasing billionaire money. None of them would see the nights she spent sleeping upright in hospital chairs. None of them would see her counting quarters at the grocery store while pretending not to panic. To people online, she would become a story. A headline. Something disposable. Vivienne lowered the phone slowly. "The article is spreading fast." Her voice sounded almost cautious now. Even she seemed surprised by how ugly things had become this quickly. Alexander took the phone from her hand. The muscles along his jaw tightened as he scanned the article. His eyes darkened colder with every passing second. "Who approved this release?" he asked quietly. Vivienne hesitated. "The board hired a crisis management firm an hour ago." "Without my authorization?" "Technically, the engagement places the company at reputational risk." Alexander gave a short, humorless laugh. "Interesting. Considering most of the board has affairs hidden behind shell companies." Vivienne's expression flickered briefly. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Alexander, listen to me carefully. They are trying to make her look manipulative before tomorrow's vote. If investors believe this engagement is emotional instability on your part, they can challenge your control position." Evelyn looked between them, suddenly realizing this was bigger than gossip. Bigger than headlines. This was war disguised in expensive suits and polite language. Alexander handed the phone back slowly. "Then they just made a catastrophic mistake." His voice remained calm, but something about the quietness made Vivienne visibly tense. Evelyn noticed it immediately. Powerful people were not afraid of Alexander when he raised his voice. They were afraid when he lowered it. Beyond the ballroom doors, reporters continued shouting questions downstairs while security struggled to contain the chaos. Through the giant windows overlooking Manhattan, red and blue camera lights now flashed faintly outside the hotel entrance below. Evelyn suddenly felt exhausted all the way down to her bones. "I should leave," she whispered. Both Alexander and Vivienne turned toward her instantly. "No," Alexander said immediately. Evelyn blinked at the force in his voice. "This is becoming dangerous for you," she continued softly. "Maybe if I disappear, this all calms down." "It will not calm down," Alexander replied. "It will confirm their narrative." Vivienne folded her arms carefully. Unfortunately, he is right. Evelyn looked at her in disbelief. Vivian sighed quietly, as though tired of her own world for the first time all evening. These people do not forgive weakness, she said softly. If you run now, they will destroy you publicly and call it responsible business strategy. The honesty shocked Evelyn more than the insult itself. Alexander stepped closer toward her beneath the warm hallway lights. Look at me. She did. You did nothing wrong. The sentence hit her harder than expected. Because for the last 20 minutes, surrounded by billionaires and headlines and cameras, she had already started wondering if somehow she had. That was the frightening thing about powerful people. They could make ordinary people feel guilty simply for existing too close to wealth. Alexander reached toward her hand slowly. Not dramatic. Not possessive. Just steady. His fingers brushed lightly against hers before closing gently around them. Warm. Grounding. Real. I asked you into this, he said quietly. So I will protect you from it. Evelyn's chest tightened painfully again. No one had protected her in a very long time. Not from bills. Not from fear. Not from exhaustion. She did not realize how badly she wanted someone to stand beside her until this moment. Then suddenly, another phone alert echoed through the hallway. Vivian looked down at her screen and her expression immediately changed. Oh no. Alexander released Evelyn's hand instantly. What now? Vivian slowly turned the screen toward them. This time the article was worse. Much worse. Splashed across every major financial news site was a newly uncovered photograph of Alexander leaving the hospital with Evelyn 3 nights earlier beneath the headline. Secret relationship between billionaire heir and struggling florist may have started before business negotiations. Evelyn stared at the new headline, while the warmth drained slowly from her fingertips. The photograph on the screen looked intimate in the cruelest possible way. Alexander stood beside her outside St. Matthew's Medical Center beneath the pale glow of hospital lights while rain fell softly around them. In the image, he was holding an umbrella over her mother's wheelchair while Evelyn looked up at him mid-conversation, exhausted and vulnerable. To strangers online, it looked romantic. Calculated. Suspicious. But Evelyn remembered exactly what really happened that night. Her mother had nearly collapsed after another round of cardiac testing. The hospital elevator broke. The rain outside had been freezing. Alexander had simply shown up unexpectedly after one of their contract meetings because he noticed she sounded tired on the phone. He stayed for 40 minutes helping her mother into the car because there were not enough nurses available downstairs. That was all. A simple act of kindness. But now the internet was turning it into evidence. This was before the contract, Vivian whispered carefully. Alexander's expression became dangerously unreadable. I know when the photograph was taken. Vivian looked uneasy for the first time all night. The board will use this to imply emotional involvement clouded your business judgment. Evelyn almost laughed from disbelief. Emotional involvement. The people upstairs discussing billion-dollar mergers spoke about human feelings the same way lawyers discuss tax codes. Cold. Clinical. Useful only when profitable. Somewhere beyond the hallway, another wave of phone alerts echoed through the ballroom. Guests were openly reading the headlines now. Some stared at Evelyn with fascination, while others watched her with something closer to contempt. She suddenly understood that in rooms like these, wealth alone was not enough. There were invisible rules. Bloodlines. History. Generations of belonging she could never fake no matter how elegant the dress or how expensive the diamond ring. She would always be the outsider they wanted removed from the picture. Alexander stepped toward Vivian slowly. Who had access to hospital surveillance footage? Vivian shook her head immediately. Not us. Then find out who sold it. His voice remained calm, but everyone in the hallway felt the shift beneath it. Vivian nodded once and immediately walked away toward the ballroom, already dialing numbers. The assistant quietly followed her. Suddenly, the hallway became silent again except for distant piano music drifting through the hotel and rain tapping softly against the windows. Evelyn looked down at the photograph one last time before handing the phone back to Alexander. I should never have agreed to this. The words came out softer than she intended. Alexander studied her carefully. Do not say that. Why not? Evelyn finally looked directly at him again. Your company is collapsing into chaos because of me. Your board hates me. The media thinks I am some desperate woman trying to marry a billionaire before her rent is due. Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence despite her effort to stay composed. Alexander's face tightened almost imperceptibly. You think I care about headlines? You should. I do not, he answered instantly. The certainty in his voice startled her. Alexander stepped closer beneath the warm golden hallway lights. Listen to me carefully, Evelyn. His tone lowered, quieter now. More personal. None of this is your fault. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But years of struggling alone had taught Evelyn something painful. When problems exploded around wealthy people, ordinary people were usually the ones blamed first. She crossed her arms tightly against herself. Maybe your board is right. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. About what? About me being a liability. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to break something. Then Alexander did something completely unexpected. He laughed. Softly. Not mocking. Just genuinely disbelieving. You think the problem in my life started when you arrived? Evelyn blinked. What? Alexander glanced toward the rain-covered skyline outside the windows. Manhattan glittered beneath the storm like gold submerged underwater. My father died fighting those people upstairs, he said quietly. My mother spent 20 years trapped inside their world pretending she was happy. His jaw tightened briefly before relaxing again. Trust me. You are not the danger here. The honesty in his voice settled deep inside Evelyn's chest. For the first time all night, she stopped seeing him only as a billionaire heir wrapped in luxury and power. Suddenly he looked like something else entirely. A lonely man standing inside a golden cage he never wanted. Then, before Evelyn could respond, the ballroom doors suddenly swung open again. A hotel security guard hurried toward them, visibly nervous. Mr. Hayes, he said carefully, there is a woman downstairs refusing to leave.